It was March of '94 when I first saw what death looked like in daylight. I was 12. Snow was melting in patches across the street, and the trains outside our town still made that low mechanical groan that reminded me of something alive and dying. That morning, I remember my father bursting into my room. His face was pale, distorted, his voice breaking as he said, "Your mom, she's at the hospital. She lost a lot of blood. And the baby, they couldn't save her." My heart didn't understand it then. My legs did. They carried me down that cold hallway of the regional clinic, past walls that reeked of bleach and despair. My mother was lying there, pale as linen, surrounded by tubes and soft beeping machines. She didn't turn her head when I called to her. Her lips barely moved. "Nadine," she whispered. That was the name of the baby's sister who was supposed to arrive that spring, the name of the child who never made it home. My father sat on the edge of her bed and gently said, "Sweetheart, they couldn't save her." The way Mom turned to him then, I'll never forget that expression. Not pain, not confusion. It was emptiness. Something inside her died long before her body could heal. "They were too late," she said flatly. "Too late." That moment changed everything for me. I stood there, a child trying to understand grief and failure, and I swore to myself, if I ever became a woman who stood between life and death, I wouldn't let death win. Years passed. The world moved on, but that moment stayed, like a crack in porcelain no glue could ever fully fix. When I told my mother I decided to enroll in nursing school, she tried to steer me toward economics. "There's more stability, more scholarships. A better future," she said, gently adjusting the collar of my second-hand blouse. But I had already sent in the application. Midwifery, I told her. Labor and delivery. From the kitchen doorway, my father, Tim Carter, once a respected electrical engineer, now a handyman for hire, smiled tiredly. "You won't change her mind, Linda. She's got that look. Just like me. Stubborn as stone." Back then, we didn't have much. My dad had worked every odd job since the factory closed down. He fixed broken TVs, unclogged neighborhood sinks, and guarded parking lots at night when he had to. I think the only thing that kept him going was me. I took the 5:20 a.m. bus every day from our sleepy suburb into the city, whispering anatomy terms to myself under dim lights while sipping coffee I couldn't afford. My classmates thought I was intense. Maybe I was. I never went out drinking or dancing, never chased boys or dreams. "You act like you're carrying the world," they used to joke. But they didn't know about Nadine, or the way my mother stopped singing, or the sound a heart makes when it breaks in silence. They didn't know what I had promised, and I wasn't about to tell them. Midwifery school was harder than I thought, and I had braced myself for hard. The first semester hit like a freight train. Double shifts at a diner on weekends, late-night study sessions squeezed between bus rides, and anatomy exams that felt like interrogations. I learned to survive on peanut butter sandwiches and 5 hours of sleep. I didn't complain. Exhaustion was easier than silence. Mom had changed since the loss. She smiled less, moved slower, avoided babies in grocery store aisles. Her grief had calcified, turning soft things brittle. I tried not to add to her weight. I studied at the library to keep our house quiet, left sticky notes on the fridge to avoid small talk. Sometimes I'd catch her standing at the window, staring at nothing, her lips moving to lullabies she no longer sang. Dad, on the other hand, aged like rain on stone. Slowly, permanently. His hands, once smooth from drafting blueprints and running wires, were now calloused, cracked from lime and cement. He still came home with dust on his boots and paint in his hair, humming out-of-tune songs from the '70s, pretending nothing hurt. But his eyes told me he hadn't stopped missing Nadine either. My first clinical rotation was at a maternity ward downtown. I wore a borrowed uniform, half a size too big, and tried not to let the seams of my nervousness show. I fainted during my first birth. literally slid down a tiled wall like a broken marionette. I woke up on the floor, cheeks flushed with shame, to the voice of a senior midwife named Judith. "Happens to the best of us, kid," she chuckled, helping me up. "You gonna run?" I didn't. I walked back in 15 minutes later with my hair still damp from the cold tap and my jaw clenched tight. That night, everything changed. The baby, tiny, purple, screaming, wrapped her fingers around mine with a grip so fierce it made me cry. I'd never felt something so small and so alive. The room disappeared. It was just her and me, breath and blood and a heartbeat that had decided to keep going. I knew then. That was it. My place in the world. After that, the fear faded. My hands got steadier. My eyes sharper. I learned to see what wasn't on the monitor, to hear what a woman's silence was screaming. Judith used to tell me, "You've got something rare, Marilyn. You don't just follow protocol, you feel it. You know when a mother is about to panic before she knows herself." I shrugged it off. I wasn't in it for praise. I just didn't want any more little girls to disappear in the middle of a hospital hallway like Nadine had. By the time I graduated, I had scars no one saw and a diploma that made my mom weep silently at the back of the ceremony hall. My dad brought a half-deflated balloon and a bottle of sparkling cider he probably borrowed money to buy. "To Nadine," he said softly, raising his paper cup. "And to you, kiddo, for giving her a voice she never got to use." I still carry that moment in my back pocket, and the fire inside me burned stronger than ever. Because now, I wasn't just chasing a dream. I was keeping a promise. I met Daniel at a birthday party I almost skipped. It was late spring, right after I'd finished a month of night shifts that left me hollow-eyed and sore in places I didn't know could ache. My best friend, Pauline, begged me to come. "Just sit, eat something, pretend to laugh," she pleaded. "You look like a ghost, Marilyn." Her dorm room hadn't changed since nursing school. The same faded curtains pinned back by textbooks, the same chipped mugs full of instant coffee. We were adults now, allegedly, but the air still smelled like burnt pasta and lavender lotion. Familiar, safe. And then he walked in, Daniel Pierce, a man who looked like he belonged in a lecture hall or a hardcover book jacket. Tweed blazer, tousled curls, a leather portfolio under his arm like it was part of his body. He had this calm, studied confidence that made people turn toward him without realizing it. When Pauline introduced us, he shook my hand with a warmth that startled me. "You're Marilyn Carter," he said, "the midwife, the one who wrote that paper on psychological thresholds in labor." His voice was low, smooth. I read it, twice, beautifully written. I laughed, awkward, flushed. "You're probably the only one who did." "I'm a historian. Obsessive by nature," he replied, smiling. And that piece, it wasn't just clinical. It was human. I remember thinking, finally, someone who sees more than scrubs and chart notes. The romance unfolded the way stories promise it will. Bookstores, rain on coffee shop windows, long walks where we traded childhood memories like postcards. He sent me poetry, quoted Tolstoy like he meant it. On our third date, he gave me a worn edition of Anna Karenina, first English translation. Every woman should own her story, he told me, not just live it. When he proposed, I didn't hesitate. He knelt in the garden behind Pauline's building, fingers smudged with ink and rose petals. I said, yes, like it was a lifeboat. The wedding was modest but elegant. Daniel insisted on a classical quartet and linen napkins folded like swans. My parents looked out of place among the professors and architects, but they smiled anyway. I told myself I had bridged two worlds, and for a while I believed I had. But the cracks appeared quietly. It started with the job. "You've worked enough," he said. "You're a wife now. Rest. Learn to make a home." I thought it was romantic. A man who wanted to care for me. Then it was the clothes. "That blouse is too loud." The friends. Pauline's unsophisticated. The phone. "I worry when I can't reach you." Just leave it on the table, sweetheart. He never raised his voice, never raised a hand, just the rules, one at a time. A suggestion here, a gentle correction there. He installed a home security system for safety, then cameras in the hallway. To monitor deliveries, he claimed. He said I was forgetful, emotional, that maybe I'd be better off with less to manage. He handled the bills, the groceries, the schedules. All I had to do was smile and stay pleasant. Eventually, I stopped answering Pauline's calls, skipped holidays with my parents, wrote thank you notes instead. The house was warm, polished, silent, and I was disappearing inside it. It happened quietly. A missed period, then another. Then one morning, I stood barefoot in the bathroom, blinking at the faint pink lines that formed across the test like the slow unraveling of a miracle. 2 lines. I sat on the edge of the tub, hands trembling, breath caught between a sob and a laugh. I had stopped hoping years ago. Every checkup had ended with the same vague shrugs from doctors. Stress can interfere. Sometimes it just doesn't happen. But it had. I pressed the test against my chest, eyes wet with something I hadn't felt in so long it scared me, joy. Daniel was in the kitchen, brewing his expensive tea and reading Foreign Affairs. I stood in the doorway like a child with a secret, clutching the test in my palm. I have news, I said. He looked up, eyebrows raised. I'm pregnant. There was a pause, a flicker I couldn't quite place in his eyes. Then a slow smile spread across his face. That's unexpected. He walked over and touched my stomach lightly, like it was a painting he didn't want to smudge. We'll have to rework the guest room, he murmured. Maybe get rid of those dusty bookshelves. For a few weeks, it was almost beautiful. He brought me chamomile tea, scheduled appointments, made lists of potential names. At night, I lay in bed and whispered to the life inside me like I used to whisper anatomy terms on the bus, softly with reverence. Then came week 8. We were eating dinner. Roasted chicken, white wine, linen napkins, as always, when Daniel set his fork down and said, "Have you considered the risks?" I blinked. What do you mean? Well, your family. Your aunt had depression, right? And you mentioned once that your cousin had some kind of disorder. And my side, too. Schizophrenia, remember? Genetics aren't forgiving. I stared at him. Daniel, I'm a midwife. I've helped hundreds of babies come into the world. I know the risks. This is our baby. That's exactly the problem, he said, voice calm as ever. You think you know, but you're emotional, Marilyn. You've never raised a child. You barely manage your own schedule. I felt the air thin around me. He started printing articles. First pregnancies after 30. Prenatal exposure to stress. Neurodevelopmental disorders linked to maternal anxiety. He cornered me in our sunlit kitchen, surrounded by medical jargon twisted into fear. Then came the final blow. A friend of his, a specialist, agreed to see me. Just to be safe, Daniel said. We went. The room was cold. The doctor never looked at me, only at Daniel. He said something about an abnormality in the fetal heartbeat, a spike in my blood pressure. Medically inadvisable, he concluded. We recommend termination. I sat frozen. I want a second opinion. Daniel placed a hand on mine. Marilyn, think about the child. Think about the quality of life. I screamed for the first time in months. Threw a cup across the kitchen wall. Told him I didn't believe any of them. 2 days later, I was bleeding. The ambulance arrived fast. Daniel didn't hold my hand. He stood by the door, arms crossed, like an administrator signing off a difficult case. The last thing I remember before going under was the sterile light above me and the way the nurse looked away when I asked if my baby still had a heartbeat. When I woke up, everything was quiet. Too quiet. I didn't pack much. Just a few changes of clothes, my nursing license, some cash, and the photo of my parents on my graduation day. Dad in his worn blazer, Mom in a floral dress she hadn't worn since Nadine. I left the ring on the kitchen table, beside a note I didn't sign. Daniel wouldn't cry. He'd call it irrational, emotional, predictable. It didn't matter anymore. I called Pauline, but her number had changed. So I called the only other person I could imagine showing up without asking questions. Bernice Caldwell. She was a retired nurse I had once trained under. A woman built of cotton and steel, with white hair always tied in a bun and a voice that could calm a birthing mother in the middle of a hurricane. I hadn't seen her in years, but I remembered the way she used to look at me during those brutal first rotations, like she saw something worth protecting. Her voice on the other end of the line was exactly the same. "You come," she said, "no questions. I've got a spare room and a kettle that never turns off." The bus to Mapleford took 6 hours. I sat by the window the whole ride, watching the world blur into green fields and long shadows. I didn't cry. I didn't sleep. I just held onto my bag like it was the only thing tethering me to the earth. Bernice met me at the station in a wool coat 2 sizes too big and a floral scarf wrapped 3 times around her neck. "You're skinnier than I remember," she muttered, pulling me into a hug that smelled like chamomile and old linen. "That man of yours doesn't know what he lost." Her apartment was small. Books stacked in corners, crocheted blankets on every chair. It was warm in a way that no thermostat could explain. She made tea with lemon and honey, sat me down and waited. I didn't speak for a long time. Then, like a dam breaking, it all came out: the gaslighting, the cameras, the manipulation, the baby I never got to meet. Bernice listened without interruption. When I finally finished, she nodded slowly. "You're not the first woman who's run from the wrong man," she said, patting my hand. "But you're one of the few who did it before she lost herself entirely." The next morning, she handed me a list of nearby clinics. This town's always short on hands, especially good ones. By the end of the week, I had an interview at Mapleford Women's Health Center, a modest clinic on the edge of town. It wasn't much. 2 delivery rooms, aging equipment, and a staff that rotated more often than the seasons. But when I stepped inside, something in my chest shifted, as if the air itself remembered who I used to be. The director, a sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Lacey Monroe, shook my hand and looked me square in the eye. "We've got more births than beds some weeks. You think you can handle that?" I nodded. "Good," she said. "We need women who don't flinch." That night, I sat on Bernice's couch, holding a chipped mug and listening to the wind rattle the windows. For the first time in years, I felt the quiet settle around me, not like a punishment, but like a pause, a beginning. The first few weeks in Mapleford felt like standing barefoot in snow, painful, disorienting, but somehow cleansing. I worked morning shifts at the women's clinic, mostly handling prenatal checkups and postpartum calls. At first, I kept my head down, did what was asked, avoided eye contact. But slowly the rhythm returned. Palpating bellies, charting fetal heart tones, offering whispered reassurance to terrified first-time mothers. It all came back like muscle memory, as if my hands had never forgotten what they were made for. Dr. Monroe didn't smile much, but she noticed. "You don't panic," she said one afternoon after a complicated intake. "You listen. That's rarer than you think." I didn't respond. I wasn't sure how to explain that listening was the only thing that had kept me alive these past few years. Bernice was the kind of woman who never let silence fester. Each evening, she insisted I join her for dinner, even if it was just soup and toast. "No one heals alone," she said. "Not well, anyway." Her apartment was filled with little domestic sounds: the kettle whistling, the clock ticking, the occasional creak of wood shifting with temperature. These were not Daniel's curated silences. These were living sounds, forgiving sounds. She started leaving books on my nightstand: old nursing journals, poetry anthologies, novels with bent spines. "This one helped me after Ed left," she'd say. Or, "This one reminded me who I was before I gave too much away." Sometimes I read them. Sometimes I just let them sit there, like quiet reminders that healing didn't always look like action. Sometimes it looked like stillness, like breath. And then there was him, Dr. Andrew Wallace, the hospital's new attending OB-GYN, Came by the clinic twice a week for high-risk consults. He was younger than I expected. Late 30s maybe, with kind eyes and the kind of calm that didn't need to announce itself. He didn't flirt, didn't pry, just nodded politely and asked thoughtful questions. We didn't speak much at first, but over time we began to orbit each other, crossing paths during difficult cases, exchanging updates in the hallway, sitting side by side during chart reviews in comfortable silence. One evening, after a grueling delivery that ended, well, only by the skin of our teeth, he offered to walk me home. Mapleford was small, and my apartment above Bernice's bakery was just a 10-minute walk down Main Street. The night air was crisp, full of wood smoke and pine. "You're good," he said softly, hands in his coat pockets. "Really good." I shrugged, just trying to stay useful. He paused, then looked at me in a way that felt too steady. "No, you're holding things together. That's different." We didn't touch, didn't make promises, but something shifted that night, not a spark, but a warmth. A small ember, placed carefully where the cold had lived too long. Back at the apartment, Bernice was already steeping chamomile. She raised an eyebrow as I stepped in. "Someone walked you back." I nodded. She handed me a cup. "It's okay, you know." "What is?" "To let someone be kind to you." I didn't answer, but I didn't argue either. It was one of those nights where the world seemed to hold its breath. Late January. Mapleford lay beneath a blanket of thick snow, the kind that muffled sound and bent tree branches with its weight. I was on night duty at the clinic, a rare thing, but we were short-staffed and I didn't mind the quiet. Most of the patients had already been discharged or tucked into prenatal observation. Only one woman remained in early labor, resting with monitors beeping gently at her side. I was finishing my shift notes when I heard it, a sound so faint I almost mistook it for the wind. Then it came again, a low, broken moan, human. I paused, pen midair, ears straining. It was coming from outside. I rushed to the window. Beyond the fogged glass, past the chain-link fence that bordered the back of the clinic, something moved. Something small, slumped near the gate, half hidden by the falling snow. Grabbing my coat and flashlight, I ran. The cold slapped my face the moment I stepped outside. Snow crunched beneath my boots, breath visible in the beam of light cutting through the dark. And then I saw her, a young woman, barely more than a girl, curled around her swollen belly, clothes soaked in blood and fluid, lips blue, eyes wild with pain and fear. Her fingers clutched the frozen ground like she was holding on to the earth itself. Hey, I'm here," I said, kneeling beside her. "My name's Marilyn. I'm a nurse. You're safe now." She shook her head weakly. Don't take her. Please." "I'm not taking anyone," I whispered. "I'm going to help you." Behind me, I heard footsteps crunching fast. Dr. Wallace had followed, still pulling on his coat. "What V we got?" "Preterm labor. Maybe 32, 33 weeks. Possible placental abruption. She's in shock." He knelt beside me, all efficiency and calm. "We need to get her inside. Now." Together, we lifted her, barely more than bones in panic, and rushed her through the back door. Bernice was already inside with a stretcher, her face pale, but steady. "Room 3, she said. "Everything's ready." Everything after that blurred into instinct. Blood. So much blood. The girl, her name was Emily, was barely conscious, whispering something over and over that I couldn't catch. Dr. Wallace barked orders. Bernice pressed gauze against Emily's abdomen. I hooked up 4 fluids with trembling hands, silently begging the monitors to stay stable. "Get ready for an emergency C-section," he said, snapping off his gloves. "We're out of time." When he handed me the baby, she wasn't breathing. She was tiny, limp, skin bluish-gray, and for a moment, just one, I felt that old helplessness rising again. The sterile lights, the empty silence. "Nadine." "No." I pressed 2 fingers gently to the baby's chest, began stimulation. cleared her airway, whispered words I didn't even realize I was saying. "Come on, little one, come on." And then a gasp, a sputter, a cry. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. "She's breathing," I said, almost not believing it. "She's breathing." Dr. Wallace paused, blood on his sleeves, sweat beading at his temple. He looked up at me, and something unspoken passed between us. We had saved her, but Emily was already slipping. I held the baby close, trying not to shake. "What's her name?" I asked, though I wasn't sure she could hear me. Emily's eyes fluttered open just once. "Mira," she breathed, and then she was gone. Just like that. I sat beside the incubator for hours, unable to move. Mira lay inside, surrounded by wires and monitors, her chest rising and falling like a whisper. She was impossibly small, 5 pounds, maybe less, but her tiny fists flexed with a stubbornness I recognized. She was fighting. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to survive, but she had. I ran a finger along the plastic wall of the incubator, tracing the curve that separated us. I didn't cry. There weren't tears left, just something tight and heavy in my chest, something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Her mother had died without a single ID. No family listed, no emergency contact. All we found was a small sketchbook in her coat pocket. Drawings of flowers and children, soft pencil lines of women holding infants in blooming fields. On the last page, scrawled in shaky handwriting, was a name, Mira. My hope. That's how I knew it wasn't a name chosen in panic. It was a name chosen in love. I brought the book home that night and sat with Bernice on her threadbare sofa, flipping through every page like they held a code I was supposed to understand. "She named her," I said quietly. "She meant for her to live." Bernice nodded, sipping her tea. Most mothers do. We sat in silence for a while, the sketchbook between us like a newborn neither of us could touch. Finally, I whispered it out loud. "I want to keep her." Bernice didn't look surprised. She set her tea down, folded her hands. "Then we need to move fast." "What do you mean?" "She doesn't have family. No paperwork. No custody designation. If the county finds out, they'll assign her a temporary guardian and put her in the system." "No," I said quickly. "No, they can't." Bernice leaned forward, voice low. "You know how it works, Marilyn. She's legally unclaimed. And right now, you're just a nurse who happened to be there. You want to be more? We've got forms to file, people to convince, hoops to jump through. It won't be easy." I looked down at the sketchbook again, at the little drawing of a sleeping infant nestled in petals. I'm not afraid of hard. Dr. Wallace helped where he could. He had contacts in social services, pulled strings to get me temporary custody while the paperwork was in motion. We worked in tandem like we had in the OR, fast, focused, without needing to speak too much. But not everyone was happy. Zena, the new surgical lead, had been cold to me since I arrived. She didn't like how quickly I'd gained trust. She didn't like how often Dr. Wallace said my name. One night, I caught her lingering near the nursery, watching me through the glass. "You're getting attached," she said without looking at me. "Dangerous, that." "She has no one," I replied, and I was there. Zena's lips curled. "And yet somehow, you're the one walking out of that, or with a baby in your arms. Must feel powerful." I didn't answer, but something in my chest twisted. I knew that look, and I knew what it meant. A week later, Dr. Wallace grew distant. He passed documents to me through nurses, stopped making eye contact. At first, I thought I'd done something wrong. Then I realized he was protecting me, because Zena had heard too much, and she was waiting to use it. At first, I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that Dr. Wallace was just busy, that the distance in his voice, the way he avoided my eyes, the fact that he hadn't stopped by the nursery once in a week, none of it meant anything. We weren't anything. We had no promises, but I felt it like a door slowly closing and locking from the other side. When I asked Bernice about it, she didn't sugarcoat it. She never did. People like him carry weight, she said. People like Zena, they wait for a slip. Sometimes staying close to someone is the quickest way to see them fall. I didn't respond. I just folded another tiny onesie into Myra's drawer and pretended my chest didn't ache. Then came the knock. It was just after 9, and Mira had finally fallen asleep after another fussy evening. I had been sorting through pediatric paperwork, half awake, half listening to Bernice hum in the kitchen. The knock was firm, measured, a stranger's knock. I opened the door and froze. The man on the porch was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a gray wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His beard was neatly trimmed, his eyes sharp but not unkind. In his hand, he held a slim leather folder. "Marilyn Carter?" he asked, voice low and direct. I nodded, suddenly aware of the heartbeat in my ears. "My name is Daniel Pierce," he said. "I believe you're caring for my daughter." I didn't understand at first. The words made sense, but the meaning didn't land until he opened the folder and handed me a document. Then a second, a photograph, and there she was, Emily, smiling in front of a mural, paint on her hands, belly already rounding beneath a loose t-shirt. Her face was softer, lighter, but unmistakable. "I hired her," Daniel said, 2 years ago, through a surrogacy agency. She was carrying my child. I sank onto the nearest chair. "You're mistaken," I said quietly. "She never mentioned anyone. No paperwork. No contact. She gave birth and died alone." His voice didn't waver. "She ran. She left a note the morning she disappeared. Said she couldn't go through with it, that the baby was hers." He paused, and for the first time I saw it, the pain beneath the polished exterior. "I searched for her for over a year. Private investigators, legal teams. Nothing. Until last week, when someone in your hospital uploaded a case report with just enough detail to catch attention." Zena. Of course. I looked at the photo again, at Emily's eyes, at the mural of swirling stars behind her, and the tiny caption below written in faint pencil. "For her. For Mira." "She named her," I whispered. Daniel nodded. "That's how I knew it was her. I chose the name. Mira means peace in an old dialect my grandmother spoke. Emily liked the sound." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it all pressing into the small room, into the old wood floor and the stale tea on the counter. "I'm not here to take her from you," he said at last, "but I do want to meet my daughter." Everything in me screamed to say no. But then I thought of Myra's eyes, so green, so full of questions I couldn't always answer. And I realized a door had just opened, not behind me, but ahead. I didn't let him hold her right away, not because I didn't trust him, but because I didn't know how to trust anyone with something so fragile again. We arranged a supervised visit at the clinic. Bernice insisted on being there, quietly reading a magazine from the corner. Dr. Wallace passed through once, but didn't stop, just nodded toward me, his face unreadable. Daniel sat across from me, hands clasped between his knees, eyes never leaving the tiny bundle asleep in my arms. I watched him watching her, not with hunger, not with fear, with longing, and something else. Regret. "She has her mother's lips," he said quietly. I looked down. Myra's mouth was soft, pursed in sleep. Emily's sketchbook flashed through my mind. Petals, swirls, the way she had written that name like a prayer. "She never told us," I murmured, "why she ran." Daniel's jaw flexed. "I think she was afraid I'd take the baby and disappear, that I only wanted a child, not the connection. And was she wrong?" His eyes met mine. I didn't understand back then. I thought biology was everything. But now, I know that showing up is louder than blood. I didn't want to cry, but I did, because somewhere deep in me, I knew exactly what he meant. For weeks, I had watched Myra's chest rise and fall with every breath, her tiny fists clench and unclench with life. I had fed her, sung to her, rocked her through colic and fevers and 1,000 tiny moments that added up to something huge. And none of that had anything to do with DNA. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't beg for rights. He just came again the next week with a book of Russian lullabies his grandmother used to sing. Then again, with a handmade mobile of paper stars and moons. Each time he stayed a little longer. Each time, I watched Myra's eyes track him across the room. Then, one snowy evening, we sat across from each other at Bernice's dining table. Mira was asleep in her carrier, fingers curled around one of Daniel's old scarves. "I've spoken to my lawyers," he said, voice low. "They're drawing up shared guardianship papers. You've raised her, loved her. I won't take that away." I didn't know what to say, so he continued, "But I'd like to be in her life, not as a visitor, as her father. And if you're willing, maybe we can find a way to do this together. Not just legally, but honestly." The air between us shifted. Not romantic. Not yet. But tender. Open. Like stepping into a field after a long winter and seeing something green breaking through the frost. Bernice passed through the room with a cup of tea, paused at the doorway, and smiled softly. "Families come in all shapes," she said. "Some are chosen. Some are built. Some are rescued from the fire." I looked at Daniel. I looked at Mira. And I felt something settle deep inside me. A stillness. A beginning. It was Bernice who found it, tucked into the lining of the old diaper bag Emily had clutched the night she arrived. The bag had been buried in the corner of the closet for weeks, used only once, and then forgotten, as if touching it had felt too close, too raw. Bernice brought it to me after breakfast, setting it down on the kitchen table like it held something sacred. "There's something inside," she said softly. "I thought you should be the one to open it." My hands trembled slightly as I unzipped the lining. Inside was a folded piece of watercolor paper, the edges frayed. I opened it slowly. The writing was shaky but deliberate, Emily's. I recognized the same looping are from the name Mira in her sketchbook. It wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. To whoever finds her, if she survives, please tell her I loved her, even when I was scared, even when I ran. I thought I had more time. I thought I could make it somewhere safe before she came. I didn't want her born in fear like I was. I never wanted to disappear. I wanted to become someone better before she met me. But if I'm gone and someone is holding her, please love her without guilt. Let her laugh. Let her be wild. Let her choose her own name for you. Tell her I drew her from starlight, and that I'm not sorry I chose her over everything. Emily, I didn't realize I was crying until a tear hit the paper and blurred the ink. I pressed the letter to my chest and sat there for a long time. Later that evening, I walked out behind the house with Mira wrapped against my chest, bundled in wool and soft blankets. The sky was pale lavender, dusk settling in. The old brick kiln behind Bernice's garden still stood, a relic from when the property had been a pottery studio decades ago. Inside the kiln, someone had stacked old firewood for winter. I lit a small flame and held the letter over it, whispering Emily's name, not out of anger, not to forget, but to release, to send it to whatever part of the sky held her now. The paper curled and blackened, ash lifting into the night like a prayer. Behind me, Mira stirred, then settled again. Daniel stepped onto the porch, watching us from a distance. He didn't speak, just stood there, hands in his pockets, letting the cold night settle into his bones the way I had learned to do. We were all survivors of something, and somehow we had chosen to survive together. I don't know what our future looks like. I don't know what Mira will call me one day, or how many times I'll stumble trying to be enough. But I know this. Love isn't just biology. It's not blood or names on a certificate. It's showing up when the storm hits. It's holding on when you're afraid. It's letting go when it's time. And sometimes it's drawing a girl from starlight and trusting that someone else will help her shine.